The day I opened that barn, I found 17 years of my mother's life hidden behind a padlock nobody thought I'd ever break. Before I take you there, hit subscribe while you're here. Tomorrow, I'm dropping a story that's going to leave you completely speechless. I was 18 years and 2 months old when I walked out of Meadowbrook Children's Home with everything I owned stuffed into a backpack and one worn duffel bag. The morning was cold, that kind of October chill that seeps through your jacket and reminds you that winter's coming, whether you're ready or not. I'd spent 11 years in the system, bouncing between foster homes before landing at Meadowbrook when I was 13. It wasn't the worst place I'd been, but it wasn't home either. Nothing ever really was. Mrs. Patterson, the director, handed me an envelope as I signed the final discharge papers. Her face had that practiced sympathy look I'd seen 1,000 times. "This came for you last week, Sophie, from a lawyer's office upstate. I meant to give it to you sooner, but with everything happening with the transition, it slipped my mind." I took the envelope, my name typed across the front in official-looking letters. Inside was a letter from someone named Richard Walsh, attorney at law, informing me that a woman named Catherine Marie Winters had passed away 4 months earlier. The name meant nothing to me at first. Then I saw the next line. "Your maternal grandmother." My stomach dropped. I'd never known my mother had any family. She died when I was 7, an overdose in a motel room 3 states away. I barely remembered her face anymore, just fragments. The smell of her perfume, the way she hummed when she was happy, which wasn't often. After she died, I'd asked my caseworkers about family, about grandparents or aunts or anyone. They always said the same thing. No one. You have no one. But apparently that was a lie. According to the letter, Catherine had left me property, a farm in upstate New York, 43 acres, with a house, a barn, and some outbuildings. There was also a savings account with $8,000, enough to get me started if I was careful. Mr. Walsh requested I contact him to arrange transfer of the property and to collect some items Catherine had left specifically for me. My hand shook as I read and reread the letter. A farm, land, money, things I'd never imagined having. But more than that, proof that someone in my bloodline had existed, had thought about me, had left me something. I called Mr. Walsh from the payphone outside Meadowbrook, my quarter clinking into the slot. He was professional but kind, explaining that Catherine had been estranged from my mother for many years, that she'd tried to get custody of me after my mother died, but had been deemed too old and too ill by the state. She'd died of cancer at 76, alone in a nursing home, but she'd made sure I'd have something when I aged out. The property has been sitting empty since her death, Mr. Walsh explained. A local man named Tom, who was a friend of Catherine's, has been checking on it periodically. But I have to warn you, Sophie, the place is pretty run down. The house is in rough shape, and according to Tom, the only structure that's really intact is the barn. But that's been locked up tight since before Catherine went into the nursing home. No one has the key. "What's in the barn?" I asked. "I don't know," he admitted. Catherine never said, but in her will, she left specific instructions that the barn was not to be opened until you arrived to claim the property. She was very adamant about that. Whatever's in there, she wanted you to be the first to see it. Something in his tone made my skin prickle. A locked barn that no one could open until I arrived. It felt like the beginning of a mystery, or maybe a test. 2 days later, I took a Greyhound bus north, watching cities give way to small towns, then farmland and forest. The landscape grew hillier, prettier, touched by early autumn colors that made everything look like a painting. I'd used some of the money Mr. Walsh had wired me to buy the ticket and had enough left over for a few weeks of careful living. The town where Catherine's farm was located was called Mill Brook, population 3,217, according to the faded sign at the town limits. It had one main street with a diner, a hardware store, a post office, and not much else. Mr. Walsh had arranged for Tom to meet me at the diner and drive me out to the property. Tom turned out to be a man in his early 60s with sun-weathered skin and kind eyes that crinkled when he smiled. He bought me lunch, a burger and fries that I devoured because I hadn't eaten since the night before, and told me about Catherine. She was a good woman, he said. Kept to herself mostly after your mother left town, but she was always fair and honest, worked as a seamstress, did alterations and custom work out of her house. She was talented, really talented. People came from 3 counties over for her work. Why didn't she and my mother get along? I asked. Tom's expression grew sad. Your mother, Sarah, was wild, wanted excitement, wanted to get out of this small town. Catherine tried to hold on too tight, I think, and Sarah ran. By the time Catherine realized she should have let her go with love instead of fear, it was too late. Sarah was gone, and she never came back. We drove out to the farm in Tom's pickup truck, turning off the main road onto a gravel driveway so overgrown with weeds it was barely visible. The property sat at the end of a winding lane, surrounded by fields that had gone wild and forest encroaching on all sides. The house was worse than I had imagined. The roof sagged in places, windows were broken, and the porch steps looked like they'd collapse if you breathed on them too hard. Paint peeled in long strips, and vines had taken over one entire side of the structure. But the barn stood, solid and proud, its red paint faded but intact. It was bigger than the house, a classic 2-story structure with a hayloft and a large sliding doors secured with a heavy padlock and chain. Like I told Mr. Walsh, Tom said, nodding toward the barn. That's the only thing that's held up. Catherine had it repaired about 15 years ago, put a new roof on it, reinforced the foundation. Then she locked it up and never went in there again, as far as I know. I walked toward the barn slowly, drawn to it in a way I couldn't explain. The padlock was serious, industrial strength, nothing I could break with bolt cutters or a hammer. Mr. Walsh said there was supposed to be a key, I said. Tom nodded. Catherine left some boxes with him, personal effects, papers, things like that. He said one of them might have the key, but he wanted you to go through everything yourself. I can take you to his office tomorrow if you want. I spent that first night in Tom's guest room, his wife Linda fussing over me like I was a lost puppy they'd found on the side of the road. They fed me a home-cooked meal, gave me clean sheets and a soft bed, and didn't ask too many questions about my years in the system. I was grateful for their kindness, but I couldn't stop thinking about the barn. What had Catherine locked away? Why had she wanted only me to see it? The next morning, Tom drove me to Mr. Walsh's office in town. The lawyer was waiting with 3 cardboard boxes, their flaps taped shut and labeled in neat handwriting, Sophie's inheritance. Take your time going through these, Mr. Walsh said. Catherine was very organized. She wanted to make sure you understood her choices and her life. I carried the boxes back to Tom's truck and spent the afternoon in their living room, carefully opening each one. The first box contained legal documents, the deed to the property, tax records, insurance papers. The second held photo albums, dozens of them, chronicling Catherine's life and my mother's childhood. I stared at pictures of Sarah as a little girl, grinning gap-toothed at the camera, holding a kitten sitting on a tractor. In later photos, she looked sullen and angry, turning away from the lens. The last photo in the album showed her at maybe 16, beautiful and defiant, standing in front of that same barn with her arms crossed. The third box held personal items: Catherine's reading glasses, a Bible with passages underlined, costume jewelry that sparkled under the light. And at the very bottom, wrapped in a silk scarf, was a small wooden box with brass hinges. My heart pounded as I opened it. Inside was a key, old and heavy, attached to a leather cord. Beneath it was a letter, the envelope yellowed with age, addressed to me in Catherine's careful handwriting. "My dearest Sophie," the letter began, "if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you've found your way to the farm. I'm sorry I couldn't be there to meet you, to explain everything in person. I'm sorry for so many things." The letter went on to explain what Tom had already told me: the estrangement from Sarah, the failed attempts to reconnect, the devastating news of her death. But then Catherine wrote something that made my breath catch. "Your mother was more talented than anyone I've ever known. She had a gift, Sophie, a gift she inherited from me but took further than I ever could. When she was young, before the anger and the rebellion, she created the most beautiful things. I tried to teach her my trade, seamstress work, but she wanted to do more. She wanted to create art. The barn holds everything she made during the last 2 years she lived here before she ran away at 17. I locked it up after she left because I couldn't bear to look at her work and remember what I'd lost. But it belongs to you now, her legacy and mine. Everything we created is in there, waiting for you to decide what it means and what you'll do with it. I know you grew up without us, without knowing where you came from. I hope the barn helps you understand who your mother was before life broke her, and I hope it helps you see who you might become." Tears blurred the words as I finished reading. Catherine had kept my mother's art locked away for decades, preserving it like a time capsule. Whatever was in that barn, it was the closest I'd ever get to knowing Sarah as a person, rather than a series of tragic facts in a case file. Tom drove me back to the farm that afternoon. I clutched the key in my hand the entire ride, feeling its weight and potential. When we pulled up to the property, I walked straight to the barn, not hesitating this time. The key slid into the padlock smoothly, like it had been waiting for this moment. The lock clicked open, and I unwound the chain, letting it fall to the ground with a heavy thud. The barn doors were stiff, but Tom helped me slide them open, revealing the dark interior. Sunlight streamed in, illuminating what had been hidden for over 2 decades, and I gasped. What comes next is something I never saw coming. Stick with me and make sure you subscribe. The barn was filled with paintings, not just a few canvases stacked in a corner, but hundreds of them. They covered every wall, hung from the rafters, leaned against support beams in careful rows. Landscapes, portraits, abstract pieces that exploded with color and emotion. In the center of the space stood easels with unfinished works, paint supplies organized on shelves, and a workbench covered with brushes and palettes, preserved exactly as my mother had left them. I walked through the space in a daze, moving from painting to painting. Some showed the farm itself, the fields in different seasons, the house when it was still beautiful, the barn from the outside. Others depicted Millbrook, the main street, the diner, faces of people I didn't recognize, but who'd clearly meant something to Sarah. But it was the portraits that stopped me cold. A woman who could only be Catherine, captured in a moment of laughter, her face open and loving. A self-portrait of Sarah at maybe 15, her eyes haunted but hopeful, and sketches, dozens of sketches, of a baby, me. My mother had drawn me over and over, imagining what I looked like, what I might become. The drawings were dated, scattered across her final months in Millbrook. She'd been pregnant when she created these, planning to leave, but not wanting to forget. Tom stood in the doorway, his expression stunned. "I had no idea," he whispered. "Catherine never said. She never told anyone what was in here." I picked up one of the paintings, a landscape showing sunrise over hills that I recognized from the drive into town. It was breathtaking, professional quality, the kind of work you'd see in galleries. My mother had been 17 when she painted this, and she'd already mastered techniques that took most artists decades to learn. "She could have been famous," I said, my voice breaking. "She could have done anything." "Maybe," Tom said gently, "or maybe she just needed to create, needed to express what she felt. That's valuable too, even if the world never sees it." Over the next week, I moved into the farmhouse despite its condition. Tom helped me patch the worst of the roof leaks and board up the broken windows. Linda brought over cleaning supplies and helped me scrub years of dirt and neglect from the rooms. It wasn't much, but it was mine, and every day I worked on making it livable felt like claiming my place in a story I'd never known I was part of. But most of my time was spent in the barn, cataloging my mother's work, trying to understand the girl she'd been before addiction and hard living had taken her away. I found journals hidden in a drawer of the workbench, filled with her thoughts about art, about feeling trapped in Millbrook, about being pregnant and terrified, but also hopeful. "I'm going to give this baby everything," she wrote in one entry. "A life bigger than this town, opportunities I never had, freedom to choose who she becomes. I just have to get out first, have to find my way." Reading her words, I realized Catherine had been wrong about one thing. Sarah hadn't run because of anger or rebellion. She'd run because she was scared, because she was young and pregnant and desperate to prove she could make it on her own. The tragedy was that she'd been too proud to come back when things got hard, too ashamed to admit she needed help. I found sketches of my father, a young man with kind eyes whose name Sarah had written in the margins. David. I'd never known his name before. According to the journal, he'd left before she told him she was pregnant, heading to California to pursue music. She'd never told him about me, never reached out, just another connection lost to fear and pride. One afternoon, while organizing the paintings, I discovered something that changed everything. Hidden behind a stack of canvases was a small wooden crate, carefully sealed and labeled, "For Sophie, when she's ready." Inside were 12 paintings, different from all the others. These were recent, or at least more recent. The paint was brighter, the canvas newer, and the subject was me. My mother had tracked me somehow, had seen photos, or maybe even watched from a distance. She'd painted me at different ages, 7, 9, 12. In some, I was smiling. In others, I looked sad or scared. But in every single one, I was surrounded by light, by hope, by a mother's desperate wish that her daughter would be okay. The final painting showed me as a young woman, standing in front of this very barn, holding a paintbrush. It was aspirational, imaginary, my mother's dream of who I might become. I sat on the barn floor surrounded by her work and cried harder than I'd cried since the day they told me she was dead. Not because I was sad, though I was, but because I finally understood. She'd loved me. In her broken, struggling way, she'd never stopped loving me. And Catherine had preserved that love, had kept it safe until I was old enough to receive it. Tom found me there an hour later, tears dried on my face, but still staring at the paintings. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded. "I think so. It's just a lot." "What are you going to do with all this?" He gestured at the artwork filling the barn. I'd been thinking about that question since the moment I opened the doors. These paintings represented my mother's talent, her dreams, her love. They deserved to be seen, to be valued, to mean something beyond our small tragedy. "I'm going to show them," I said. "I'm going to find a gallery, maybe in New York City, and I'm going to make sure people know who Sarah Winters was and what she could create." Over the following months, that's exactly what I did. I photographed every piece, created a portfolio, and started reaching out to galleries. Most ignored me. A few sent polite rejections, but one gallery owner, a woman named Rachel who specialized in outsider art and emerging voices, agreed to look at the work. She drove up to Millbrook herself, spending an entire day in the barn, examining each painting with professional scrutiny. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. "This is extraordinary. Your mother had raw talent that most trained artists never achieve. The emotional depth, the technical skill, it's all here. I want to do a show, a retrospective of her work. We'll call it Sarah Winters' Hidden Light. It'll honor her legacy and introduce the world to an artist they should have known." The show opened 6 months later in a prestigious gallery in Manhattan. Art critics came, collectors came, people who'd never heard of Sarah Winters but recognized genius when they saw it. The paintings sold, not all of them, because I kept my favorites, but enough to generate serious money, enough to renovate the farmhouse, to secure the property's future, to set up a fund for my own education. But, more importantly, the show told Sarah's story, her struggle, her talent, her love for the daughter she'd tried so hard to provide for. Newspapers wrote articles. Art blogs featured her work. People who'd known her in Millbrook came forward with memories, painting a fuller picture of the girl she'd been. And I discovered something about myself in the process. Standing in that gallery, surrounded by my mother's paintings, I realized I'd inherited more than just her art. I'd inherited her need to create, to express, to make something beautiful from pain. I started painting, not in my mother's style, but in my own, finding my voice through color and canvas. The barn became my studio, my sanctuary, the place where Sarah's legacy and my future merged into something new. Tom and Linda became like family, checking on me, celebrating my small victories, providing the stability I'd never had. The Millbrook community, once strangers, embraced me as one of their own. Catherine's neighbors shared stories about her kindness, and her quiet strength. I began to understand that I came from women who'd survived, who'd created beauty in hard circumstances, who'd loved fiercely, even when that love was complicated. One year after opening the barn, I stood in the same spot where I'd first seen my mother's paintings. The space looked different now, organized and active, a working studio rather than a museum of the past. My own work hung alongside Sarah's, a conversation across time between mother and daughter, both of us trying to make sense of the world through art. I thought about the girl I'd been, walking out of Meadowbrook with nothing but a backpack and a duffel bag. I'd been so scared, so uncertain about what came next. I'd had no idea that a locked barn in upstate New York held the answers to questions I'd been asking my entire life. Where did I come from? Who were my people? Did anyone ever love me? The barn had answered all of it. I came from artists and survivors. My people were complicated and flawed, but full of talent and hope. And yes, I had been loved, desperately and completely, by a mother who'd tried her best and a grandmother who'd preserved her legacy until I could claim it. The farm wasn't just property I'd inherited. It was proof that even when people fail you, even when circumstances tear families apart, love finds a way to survive. Catherine had locked that barn to protect Sarah's memory, to keep her daughter's dreams safe, and in doing so, she'd given me the greatest gift possible, a connection to who I was and who I might become. I still live on the farm, painting in the barn, selling work through Rachel's gallery, and teaching art workshops to kids from the system, kids like I'd been, who needed to know they came from somewhere, that they had value, that their stories mattered. Every morning, I walk past the portrait Sarah painted of me standing in front of the barn with a paintbrush, and every time I think about how she'd imagined this future for me, how she'd held on to hope even when everything else fell apart. The barn had been locked for 17 years, keeping secrets and preserving love. Now it's open, full of light and creation, a place where past and future exist together, where a mother's dreams for her daughter finally came true. Thank you so much for listening to Sophie's story. If it touched your heart, please subscribe to the channel. It really helps us continue sharing these stories of hope, resilience, and unexpected discoveries. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever discovered something about your past that changed everything? Have you found hidden treasures in unexpected places? Share your story with our community. You never know who might need to hear it. And before you go, click on one of the 2 stories on your screen. Each one is a journey worth taking. Until next time, take care of yourselves and remember that sometimes the things we're looking for have been waiting for us all along.